Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Good morning, everybody. Now I will talk to you about the drugs used in constipation. How many of you have ever suffered constipation? Perhaps you are a younger generation. Constipation is a major problem in sedentary life, is a major problem in those who are elderly, and it's very troublesome sometimes. Decreased frequency as well as difficulty in initiation or passage of firm or small volume feces or feeling of incomplete evacuation, that is the constipation. You might have seen sometime people commenting upon that you look like a constipating face, that means he is feeling uncomfortable, and that is primarily, and most of the Indian psyche is that if they have a good stool passage they feel good, and a constipation, that means lethargy and all things like that. Now, what is the management of constipation? The first thing one must advise in a patient of constipation is take fiber rich diet. Today in a modern age we take a lot of maida, lot of low fiber diet, ready made food, and that is one of the reason of constipation. So, first objective of management of constipation is fiber rich diet, and it should at least have 20 to 35 gram of fiber diet. The second direction you should give to the patient suffering from constipation, that are you taking sufficient fluid? If not, then take good amount of fluid. People say that if you take 4 glasses of water in the morning, 2 glasses of water in the morning, or large amount of water in the day, the chances of getting constipation is much less. Appropriate bowel habits, because it is the bowel which gets tuned to your habit, and that is why constipation is sometimes seen in those who have a shift duties, in railway drivers, truck drivers, or maybe shift duties where the bowel habits is altered because of their constraints, and therefore it is important that you create a bowel habit so that your bowel is trained to get evacuated at a particular time. And if a person is taking a drug which is known to cause constipation, you avoid those drugs, and these drugs are opioids, anticholinergic drugs, and any drug which has anticholinergic effect, maybe antidepressant, antihistaminic or tricyclic antidepressant, primarily anticholinergics, diarrheal. Now, all these drugs, they can cause constipation because of decreased motility, and these things should be avoided. Drugs which are used are two. One is called as a laxative and other is called as a cathartic. There is not much a difference between laxative and cathartics. Many times they are used interchangeably. If laxative is given in a high dose, then this becomes cathartic. Laxation or laxative means evacuation of formed fecal material from the rectum is called as a laxation or laxative. Cathartic, evacuation of unformed usually watery fecal material from the entire colon is cathartic. Now, cathartic is usually given in when you want to completely evacuate, wash out the intestinal tract, and available drugs are mostly laxative in lower doses, but if you give them in high doses then becomes cathartic. The problem with the catharsis is this causes spasm and this can be painful also. Mechanism of laxative, if you just see that this is the intestine. So, how can you produce laxative or how can laxation? One is if you increase the bulk of the content here, fecal content, and how can you increase the bulk of the fecal content? You add the agent which is a bulk forming, and the bulk forming agent would be an agent which is pharmacologically and calorie wise inert, goes into the intestine, absorbs water, swells and then becomes larger volume, and then it exerts pressure on the intestine. When it exerts pressure on the intestine, it initiates peristaltic movements, and that is called as a bulk forming agent. And we will talk about what are the bulk forming. And do you remember any agent which you might have seen people consuming elderly? Isabgol husk, bran. If you put bran or isabgol husk into the glass of water, 1 ml, 1 teaspoon will become about 100 ml after getting swelled with the water which it absorbs from that. The other thing is you increase the water content of the stool, and that is by drawing water from the intestinal wall or not allowing the water to be absorbed, and this is called as a saline purgative. The other drug is you stimulate propulsion of the contraction, you stimulate the intestine by a mechanism which irritates this, and that is called as a stimulant, and then decrease net absorption of fluid, that is osmotic purgative. These are luminally active. Mind you, once you are giving orally these drugs, these laxatives should act only in the intestine. So, they are luminally active and absorbs water by hydrophilic or by osmotic mechanism. Now, if they absorb water by osmotic mechanism, and if you do not give adequate water with these, it may lead to dehydration. The drugs which stimulate are called as a irritant purgative. They act by stimulating enteric nervous system, and this is called as a prokinetic or secretory agent used primarily as a irritable bowel syndrome, which is constipation predominant. Luminally active agents, the drugs which act inside the intestinal lumen. Lubricant, which just lubricate, this is the intestinal tract, this will just lubricate the wall, so that the passage of the stool becomes smooth. The advantage that the minimum effort is required to expel the fecal content. The indication would be that a patient who is hospitalized after myocardial infarction, complete bed rest, the drug of choice is lubricant purgative, and the drugs are liquid paraffin and Drocusets. Liquid paraffin has a bad taste, and therefore, many taste masking agents are used with liquid paraffin. The problem with liquid paraffin is that when it is taken orally, it dribbles down through the anus and it leaks from the anus, and this can be a social problem sometimes when there is a leaking. So, the person has to be told that this may leak without information. So, there has to be sometimes padding in the anus is required. The other is the bulk forming purgative, isabgol or bran, which increases bulk, osmotic purgative like PEG, lactulose, which is very commonly used these days, and saline laxative, and stimulant or irritant is bisacodyl, most commonly senna and cascara, and castor oil, which is not used now because of the bad taste, but sometimes it was used, and even today it is used in the capsules. Important thing to know about the laxative is the time of onset. Lubricants usually act as 1 day it takes, because it will take time to cross, and bulk forming also takes 1 day. Osmotic purgative, usually saline purgatives just take 1 to 3 hours. So, one should not take osmotic purgative just at the bedtime. Bisacodyl acts as 6 to 8 hours, and castor oil acts very faster, 1 to 3 hours. Lubricant laxative, which is also called as a stool wetting agents or emollients, this onset of action usually take 1 day, but sometimes it takes longer time. Mineral oil, liquid paraffin, petroleum products penetrates, softens the stool, it goes into the stool, interferes with the absorption of water. So, the more absorption, more water remains in the intestine, and then it becomes a liquid. The issue of adverse drug reaction is anal seepage. Fat soluble vitamin deficiency can occur because it may reduce the fat soluble vitamin absorption, and rarely lipid pneumonitis can happen. Docusets, these are the anionic surfactants that lower the surface tension of the stool and stimulate secretion. Dioctyl sodium, this is used as a 100 milligram twice daily, and this has a marginal efficacy. Here the more important is use in mineral oils. As I said, bulk forming laxative, dietary fibers and supplements, fiber part of the food that resists enzymatic digestion, that is called as a fiber, and reaches the colon largely unchanged. Undergoes fermentation by colonic bacteria and production of short chain fatty acid, which produces prokinetic effect, is stimulate the intestinal movements. Examples of bulk forming laxatives are bran, this is obtained from cereal grains, 40% of dietary fiber. Psyllium preparations, methyl cellulose and calcium polycarbophil, semi-synthetic acrylic polymer is also used, and dose 1 to 3 grams is usually used because this swells up, and the onset of action usually takes about not less than 12 hours. The major problem with this is this causes gas formation or flatulence. Osmotically active agents, PEG or polyethylene glycol, used in bowel preparation for surgery, because here you require purging, more strong purging, and this is molecular weight of 3350 delta and supplemented with electrolytes, because the electrolyte imbalance otherwise may happen, and onset it takes about a day. Adverse drug reaction, nausea, vomiting, cramping, bloating can occur. Saline laxative, magnesium or phosphate ions, they cause purgation, and if you remember, calcium, aluminum, they cause constipation, magnesium cause purgation, and magnesium stimulates cholecystokinin release, and therefore this causes purgation. The onset of action it much faster, usually 30 minutes to 6 hours the onset takes place. In renal dysfunction, magnesium may not be eliminated, and this may cause cardiac disease, and therefore contraindicated in renal function, renal dysfunction, cardiac disease and electrolyte abnormalities. In that situation, saline purgatives are contraindicated. Lactulose, very commonly used drug and the drug of choice used in hepatic encephalopathy, because hepatic encephalopathy is sometimes reversed or intensity is reduced by administration of lactulose. This is synthetic disaccharide of galactose and fructose, hydrolyzed in colon in SCFA, and the dose of lactulose is 1 to 2 tablespoon, that is 15 to 30 ml at night, and onset of action usually is 24 hours. Adverse drug reaction is abdominal distension and flatulence is commonly seen. The another group of agent is stimulant laxative, and stimulant laxative, they directly affect on enterocytes, enteric neurons and GI smooth muscle, leading to low grade inflammation, increased motility and secretion, and adverse drug reaction may cause atonic non-functioning colon or colonic ischemia. Contraindication is never give a stimulant laxative in intestinal obstruction, because if there is a already obstruction, intestinal obstruction, and if we are giving the stimulant laxative, it will stimulate and this may cause much more complication. Bisacodyl is a very commonly used laxative, requires hydrolysis by endogenous enterase in the bowel for activation, available as enteric coated tablet and also used as a suppository, and this is available as a small 10 to 30 milligram tablets and suppository is 10 milligram. The stimulant laxative, anthraquinone derivatives and Cassia acutifolia and Cascara sagrada, this is the anthraquinone, and chronic use can cause melanocytosis coli and not regarded as safe, and therefore, these are the laxative, but not so commonly used. Castor oil can cause severe catharsis and it is unpleasant taste, so it is not used. Lastly, if these drugs do not work, then one has to give enema, and this is a bowel preparation requirements, bowel preparation regimens to empty the distal colon or rectum of retained solid material, how you can bring it, and bowel distension by any means will produce an evacuation reflex by saline, by glycerine. If you just give the bowel here, if you distend it, this will cause a reflex evacuation. Indication: preparation for bowel for abdominal surgeries, colonoscopy, radiological procedures, in that case enema is given. Irritable bowel syndrome, which is constipation predominant, prokinetic agents are used, which increases the gastric motility. Secretory agents are also used, and the drug which are used for irritable bowel syndrome is 5-HT4 agonist, and this promote GI motility. The drug which has been banned is cisapride, because there was an issue of cardiac events, and the drug which is used is prucalopride. Lubiprostone and other agents which I would not go into the details, these are used drug with certain efficacy in irritable bowel syndrome, which is constipating predominant. Another problem with constipation is in subjects which are opioid dependent, or getting opioid drugs for cancer pain. This is called as opioid induced constipation. This opioid induced constipation is usually refractory to other management strategies. Opioids used in cancer pain or palliative care, peripherally restricted mu receptor opioid antagonist. Now, drugs which are used here is methyl naltrexone, naldimadine, oxycodone and naloxone and naloxegol. Now, these are the agents which are restrictive use only in opioid induced constipation, because in these situations no other management works. So, if I just conclude, the drugs for constipation is the primary management is objective is to help in evacuation of the intestinal content. If it is solid, make it less solid or towards more less form, and that you do it by increasing fluid content. So, the first approach is give bulk forming, and the bulk forming would be give an pharmacologically inert substance which goes into intestine, absorbs water and then swells up and then stimulates the intestine and peristaltic movements. The disadvantage, this causes exertion, therefore, this should be contraindicated in myocardial infarction or patient when there is a patient is an exhaustive stage. This is the best agent in normal situation, but it sometimes is a habit forming. The saline purgative, you give hyperosmolar fluid by magnesium salts, it not allows the water to be absorbed, rather it drains water and makes liquid the watery fluid in the intestine. The risk is it may cause metabolic or systemic alkalosis sometimes if it is absorbed, and if the magnesium is salts are used in renal insufficiency, then it can cause magnesium overload. The third is liquid paraffin, which will have the lubricant effect, but it may cause sometimes fat absorption, the absorption of fat soluble vitamin deficiency. And finally, the drugs for irritable bowel syndrome, which are a constipating agent, which are different, and drugs for the opioid induced constipation. Thank you.